I stared in disbelief at the small rectangular box nestled between the seats of Trent's car. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out, the burgundy velvet glinting under the dim garage light. This was the anniversary gift I had been eagerly anticipating for weeks, the one that never materialized. Lifting the lid, I felt my heart sink. Inside lay a sparkling diamond necklace, the price tag still attached. A small note scrawled on the box's inner lining read, "To my darling Clara, love Trent." My vision blurred as tears welled up. How could this be happening? We had been married for 15 years, and Trent and I had built a comfortable life together. Or so I had thought. This gift, this betrayal, shattered that illusion. As I sank onto the cold cement floor, a crumpled piece of paper caught my eye. Unfolding it, I found a child's drawing, crudely depicting a family of 3, a woman, a man, and a young girl. At the bottom, in wobbly handwriting, were the words, "Daddy Trent." The pieces fell into place. Trent's late nights at the office, his constant excuses to be away from home. He had another family, another life that he was leading behind my back. All those years I had proudly called myself his wife, the mother of his children. It was all a lie. Rage bubbled within me, threatening to consume me. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there. But instead, I took a deep breath and forced myself to think rationally. I needed to gather more evidence, to uncover the full extent of his betrayal, before I confronted him. Carefully, I placed the necklace and the drawing back in the box, tucking it into my purse. As I made my way back to the house, I could feel the weight of what I had discovered pressing down on me. How could I face Trent now, knowing what I knew? The trust we had built over the years, the foundation of our marriage, had crumbled. That night, as Trent sat across the dinner table from me, chatting amiably about his day, I struggled to maintain my composure. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but I held my tongue. I needed to be strategic, to plan my next move carefully. After the children had been put to bed, I followed Trent into the living room where he settled into his favorite armchair, flipping on the TV. Taking a seat beside him, I cleared my throat. "Trent, we need to talk." He glanced up, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong, honey?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. "I found something in your car today, something that belongs to someone else." Trent's eyes widened and a flicker of panic crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" "The anniversary gift you never gave me," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "The one you bought for your mistress, Clara." Trent opened his mouth, but no words came out. He sat there frozen, his guilt etched on his features. "And that's not all," I continued, pulling the drawing from my purse and thrusting it at him. "Who's this little girl, Trent? Another one of your secrets." Trent's face paled, and he ran a hand through his hair, his usual confident demeanor crumbling. "Rena, I can explain." "Save it," I snapped, holding up a hand to silence him. "I don't want your excuses. I want the truth. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, the finality of my statement sending a chill through the room. Trent stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. In that moment, I knew this was the end of our marriage, the end of the life I had known. But I was done being the victim. It was time to take control of my own destiny. The tension in the room was palpable as Trent and I stared at each other, the silence punctuated only by the muffled sound of the television. I could see the cogs turning in his mind, scrambling to come up with some feeble excuse, but I was done listening to his lies. "Well?" I snapped, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. "Aren't you going to say anything?" Trent cleared his throat, his eyes darting around the room, anywhere but meeting my gaze. "Rena, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "Sorry?" I scoffed, the bitterness in my voice cutting through the air. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea how much this hurts? How much you've betrayed me and our family?" He winced, his shoulders slumping, and I knew I had struck a nerve. "Good. Let him feel the weight of his actions." "It's not what you think," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor. "It's a complicated situation." I let out a humorless laugh. "Complicated? Trent, you're having an affair and you've got another child. How is that in any way complicated?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his brow furrowed in a futile attempt to find the right words. I watched as the realization dawned on him. There was no way to spin this, no way to make it sound even remotely acceptable. I don't know what to say, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Say? I leaned forward, my eyes blazing with fury. How about you start by admitting that you're a liar and a cheater, that you've been living a double life, betraying our marriage and our family? Trent flinched, and I knew I had struck a nerve. Good. Let him feel the weight of his actions. Rena, please, he pleaded, reaching out to me. I know this looks bad, but don't you dare touch me, I snarled, jerking away from his outstretched hand. You lost the right to do that the moment you decided to stick your dick in someone else. Trent's face flushed, and he opened and closed his mouth a few times, like a fish out of water. I took a grim satisfaction in seeing him squirm, his usual air of confidence and control completely shattered. I don't know what to say, he finally managed, his voice trembling. That's the problem, Trent, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. You've said enough. Now it's time for you to listen. I reached into my purse and pulled out the box containing the diamond necklace, tossing it onto his lap. This is your darling Clara's gift, isn't it? And this, I dropped the child's drawing on top of the box, is your other family, isn't it? Trent stared at the items, his face a mask of shame and guilt. I watched as he ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic I had come to recognize over the years. Rena, I can explain. No, I cut him off, my voice firm. I don't want your explanations. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Trent's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of fear in them. Good. Let him be afraid. A divorce? He sputtered. But what about Evelyn? You can't just abandon her. She needs us. I felt my jaw tighten, the mention of my insufferable mother-in-law only fueling my anger. Don't you dare try to guilt me, Trent. Evelyn is your problem now. I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to take responsibility for your actions. Trent opened his mouth, but no words came out. He sat there staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and desperation, and I knew in that moment that the balance of power had shifted. I was no longer the victim, but the one in control. In the days that followed my confrontation with Trent, I felt a sense of renewed purpose. The initial shock and heartbreak had given way to a steely determination to take control of my life. I started freelancing again, leveraging my marketing expertise to build up a stable income stream. Trent, of course, was less than thrilled about this, insisting that my place was at home, caring for Evelyn and the children. Rena, you can't just abandon your responsibilities, he would argue, his brow furrowed in frustration. Evelyn needs you, and the kids need a stable home. I would simply fix him with a hard stare, my lips pressed into a thin line. Trent, I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm taking care of myself for a change. You can handle Evelyn and the children. After all, you seem to have plenty of experience juggling multiple families. The jab would instantly wipe the self-righteous expression off his face, and he would sulk off, muttering under his breath. I took a grim satisfaction in knowing that I had the upper hand now, that I held the power to make his life just as miserable as he had made mine. As I worked tirelessly, building up my freelance business, I also made it a point to thoroughly document Trent's misdeeds. I combed through our financial records, uncovering a trail of suspicious expenses. Expensive dinners, lavish gifts, even a down payment on a second apartment. It was clear that Trent had been pouring a significant amount of our family's resources into maintaining his secret life with Clara. Armed with this evidence, I began to quietly siphon funds into a separate account, stashing away money for my own future. Trent, of course, remained blissfully unaware of my activities, too focused on his own devious schemes to pay much attention to our household finances. As Evelyn's health continued to decline, Trent's neglect of her became increasingly evident. I would often arrive home to find the house in disarray, Evelyn's needs unattended to. It infuriated me, but I remained outwardly calm, biding my time and carefully planning my next move. One particularly trying day, I arrived home to find Evelyn sitting in her wheelchair, her hair disheveled and her clothes stained. Trent was nowhere to be seen, and when I asked Evelyn where he was, she merely shrugged, her eyes glazed over with a mix of confusion and resentment. "That no-good son of mine is off doing God knows what," she grumbled, her voice laced with bitterness, "leaving me here to rot, just like he does every day." I bit my tongue, swallowing the retort that threatened to spill out. Instead, I gently helped Evelyn into the bathroom, carefully bathing and dressing her. As I brushed her hair, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the old woman. Beneath her caustic exterior, she was just as much a victim of Trent's betrayal as I was. Later that night, as Trent stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and the familiar scent of Clara's perfume, I confronted him. "Trent, we need to talk about Evelyn. She's not doing well, and you're hardly ever here to help." He waved a dismissive hand, his gaze unfocused. "Evelyn's fine, Rena. She's got you to take care of her, doesn't she? That's what you're here for, after all." I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Trent, this isn't sustainable. Evelyn needs more attention and care than I can provide on my own. We need to start looking into assisted living options for her." Trent's eyes widened, and he shook his head vehemently. "Absolutely not. I'm not putting my mother in some home. She belongs here, with her family." "Then you need to start being a part of this family, Trent," I retorted, my voice strained. "Evelyn is your responsibility too, and you're failing her just as much as you're failing me and the kids." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "I'm done discussing this. I've already started looking into options for Evelyn, and I'll be making the necessary arrangements, with or without your input." Trent glared at me, his jaw clenched, but I could see the hint of fear in his eyes. He knew I was serious, that I was no longer willing to be the dutiful wife and caretaker. I was taking control of my own life, and there was nothing he could do to stop me. As Evelyn's demands grew more and more taxing, I found myself increasingly isolated. Trent's disinterest in his mother's care only intensified, and he spent more and more time with Clara, leaving me to shoulder the burden alone. I would come home to find Evelyn in her wheelchair, her medications scattered on the floor, and her dinner untouched. She would berate me endlessly, her sharp tongue lashing out with a venomous fury that only added to my exhaustion. "Where's that useless son of mine?" she would snarl, her eyes narrowed to slits. "Off gallivanting with his whore, no doubt. And you, Rena, you're just as useless, letting this place fall to pieces." I would grit my teeth, biting back the retort that threatened to spill out. Instead, I would silently tend to Evelyn's needs, carefully administering her medications and ensuring she was fed and comfortable. It was a thankless task, but I knew I had to keep my composure if I wanted to execute my plan. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Trent burst through the front door, his face flushed and his eyes wild. "Rena, we need to talk," he announced, his voice quivering with a strange mixture of panic and excitement. I turned to face him, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "What is it, Trent?" He took a deep breath, his gaze darting around the room as if he was afraid someone might overhear. "It's Clara. She's pregnant." I felt my heart drop, the dish towel slipping from my grasp as a wave of nausea washed over me. Of course, I had suspected as much, but hearing the confirmation still hit me like a punch to the gut. "Pregnant?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I suppose you're the father." Trent nodded, a strange glint of pride in his eyes. Yes, I am. And I want you to leave, Rena. I want a divorce. I want to be with Clara and our child." I stared at him, my mind reeling. After all this time, after all the pain and betrayal, he had the audacity to demand a divorce on his terms, as if I was some inconvenience to be discarded. "You want me to leave?" I repeated, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You're the one who's been having an affair, Trent. You're the one who's been living a double life and betraying our family, and now you have the nerve to tell me to leave?" Trent held up his hands, a placating gesture. "Rena, please, try to understand. This is my chance to start a new life, to be a father to my child. I can't be tied down to you and Evelyn anymore." I felt my fingers curl into fists, my nails digging into the palms of my hands. Tied down? Is that how you see me, Trent? As some burden to be cast aside? He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, my voice rising in pitch. "No, Trent, you don't get to make this decision for me. I'm the one who's been betrayed, who's been left to pick up the pieces of your selfish, despicable actions. And I'm not going anywhere." Trent's eyes widened, and he took a step back, as if he had not anticipated my vehement refusal. "Rena, you don't understand," he tried to explain, his voice tinged with desperation. "This is my chance to be happy, to have the family I always wanted." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. The family you always wanted? Trent, you already had a family. You had a wife and children who loved you, and you threw that all away for some cheap affair and a mistress who's now carrying your child. Trent's face flushed, and he opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand, silencing him. No, Trent, you made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. I'm not leaving, and I'm not giving you a divorce. You're going to have to deal with me, with Evelyn, and with the mess you've created. The finality in my tone seemed to hit Trent like a physical blow, and he stared at me, his mouth working soundlessly. I could see the realization dawning on him, that he had underestimated my resilience, my willingness to fight for what was rightfully mine. In that moment, I felt a surge of power, a sense of control that I hadn't experienced in years. Trent was no longer the one in charge. I was. And I was going to use that power to bring him down, to make him pay for the pain he had caused. The tension in the house was palpable as Trent and I faced off, our once loving marriage reduced to a battlefield of accusation and recrimination. I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed web of lies was about to unravel. "Rena, please," he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "Think about what you're doing. Think about our family, our children." I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. "Our family, Trent? Don't you mean your family with Clara?" I paused, pinning him with a hard stare. "And as for the children, I'm doing this for them. I'm not going to let them grow up thinking that this kind of betrayal is acceptable." Trent opened his mouth, but before he could speak, I held up a hand, silencing him. "I have evidence, Trent," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I've been documenting everything, your financial misdeeds, your neglect of Evelyn, your affair with Clara, and I'm going to use it all against you." His eyes widened, and I could see the color drain from his face. "Rena, you can't." "I can, and I will," I interrupted, my resolve hardening. "You've betrayed me, Trent. You've betrayed our family, and now you're going to pay the price." Trent ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I had come to recognize over the years. "Rena, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out, I promise." I shook my head, unwavering. "No, Trent, there's nothing to talk about. I want a divorce, and I want it now." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Trent stared at me, his mouth working soundlessly, as the full weight of my demand sank in. But what about Evelyn?" he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can't just abandon her, Rena. She needs us." I felt a surge of anger at his pathetic attempt to manipulate me. "Don't you dare try to guilt me, Trent. Evelyn is your responsibility, not mine. You're the one who's been neglecting her, not me." Trent opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off, my voice sharp and unyielding. "No, Trent. I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to step up and take care of your own mother. And as for the children, I'll be filing for full custody. You can see them, but only under my terms." Trent's face twisted with a mixture of shock and fury. "You can't do this, Rena. You can't take my children away from me." I held up the manila envelope I had been clutching, the evidence of his misdeeds tucked neatly inside. "I can, and I will, Trent, unless you want me to expose your affair and your financial misdeeds to your family, your friends, and your employer." Trent's eyes widened, and I could see the realization dawning on him. He had underestimated me, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. "Rena, please," he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'll do anything. Just don't do this." I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. "It's too late for that, Trent. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Trent standing in the middle of the living room, his world crumbling around him. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer willing to be the victim. It was time to take control of my own destiny, even if it meant destroying the man I had once loved. The air was thick with tension as Trent and I faced off in the middle of the living room, the evidence of his betrayal clutched tightly in my hand. I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling. "Rena, please," he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "Think about what you're doing. Think about our family, our children." I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. "Our family, Trent? Don't you mean your family with Clara?" I paused, pinning him with a hard stare. "And as for the children, I'm doing this for them. I'm not going to let them grow up thinking that this kind of betrayal is acceptable. Trent opened his mouth, but before he could speak, I held up a hand, silencing him. I have evidence, Trent, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I've been documenting everything. Your financial misdeeds, your neglect of Evelyn, your affair with Clara, and I'm going to use it all against you. His eyes widened, and I could see the color drain from his face. Rena, you can't. I can, and I will, I interrupted, my resolve hardening. You've betrayed me, Trent. You've betrayed our family, and now you're going to pay the price. Trent ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I had come to recognize over the years. Rena, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out, I promise. I shook my head, unwavering. No, Trent, there's nothing to talk about. I want a divorce, and I want it now. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Trent stared at me, his mouth working soundlessly as the full weight of my demand sank in. But what about Evelyn? He finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. You can't just abandon her, Rena. She needs us. I felt a surge of anger at his pathetic attempt to manipulate me. Don't you dare try to guilt me, Trent. Evelyn is your responsibility, not mine. You're the one who's been neglecting her, not me. Trent opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off, my voice sharp and unyielding. No, Trent, I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to step up and take care of your own mother. And as for the children, I'll be filing for full custody. You can see them, but only under my terms. Trent's face twisted with a mixture of shock and fury. You can't do this, Rena. You can't take my children away from me. I held up the manila envelope I had been clutching, the evidence of his misdeeds tucked neatly inside. I can, and I will, Trent, unless you want me to expose your affair and your financial misdeeds to your family, your friends, and your employer. Trent's eyes widened, and I could see the realization dawning on him. He had underestimated me, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. Rena, please, he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. I'll do anything, just don't do this. I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. It's too late for that, Trent. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Trent standing in the middle of the living room, his world crumbling around him. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer willing to be the victim. It was time to take control of my own destiny, even if it meant destroying the man I had once loved. As I made my way to the bedroom, I could hear Trent's desperate calls echoing behind me. Rena, please, don't do this. Think of the children. But I refused to look back, my mind set on the path I had chosen. Once in the bedroom, I locked the door and sank down onto the bed, my hands trembling as I opened the envelope. The evidence was damning. Bank statements, credit card records, even tawdry love letters from Clara. I could feel my heart racing as I sorted through the papers, my resolve hardening with each passing moment. I knew that what I was about to do would change everything, but I was no longer willing to be the victim. Trent had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it. With a deep breath, I began making the necessary phone calls, to my lawyer, to Trent's family, to his employer. The words spilled out of me, my voice calm and steady as I laid bare the full extent of Trent's betrayal. As the news of his affair and financial misdeeds began to spread, I could feel the balance of power shifting. Trent's world was crumbling around him, and I took a grim satisfaction in knowing that I was the one who had brought him down. In the aftermath, Trent pleaded with me, begging for a second chance, but I refused to budge. I was done being the dutiful wife, the silent sufferer. It was time for me to take control of my own life, even if it meant sacrificing the man I had once loved. As the divorce proceedings began, I steeled myself for the battles to come. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to fight for my freedom, for my children, and for the life I deserved. The divorce proceedings were a whirlwind of emotions and legal maneuvering, but I remained steadfast in my determination to reclaim my life. Trent, once the confident breadwinner of our family, now found himself on the defensive, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of my evidence. During the heated negotiations, Trent made one last-ditch effort to sway me, appealing to my sense of duty and responsibility. Rena, think of Evelyn, he pleaded, his eyes desperate. She needs us, both of us. You can't just abandon her. I leveled him with a cold stare, the memories of his neglect and betrayal fueling my resolve. Evelyn is your responsibility, Trent, not mine. You've made it clear where your priorities lie, and they don't include your family. Trent opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing him. No, Trent, I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to step up and take care of your own mother. As for the children, I will be filing for full custody. You can see them, but only under my terms. The color drained from Trent's face, and I could see the panic setting in. He knew that he had lost, that the once formidable control he had wielded over our lives was slipping through his fingers. With a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket and produced a set of keys. Fine, Rena. Take the house. Take the kids, but promise me you'll at least let me see them occasionally. I regarded him coolly, my lips pressed into a thin line. Of course, Trent, but understand this. I will not tolerate any more of your lies or your betrayals. If you so much as set a foot out of line, I will make your life a living hell. Trent flinched, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I understand, he mumbled. As the divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had reclaimed my freedom, yes, my independence, and my children. Trent, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of his actions. With the help of my lawyer, I exposed the full extent of Trent's infidelity and financial misdeeds to his family, his friends, and his employer. The fallout was swift and merciless, as Trent found himself shunned by those he had once counted as allies. His job, his social standing, and even his relationship with his own mother, Evelyn, who had once been his staunchest defender, all crumbled around him. I watched with a grim satisfaction as he spiraled into a pit of despair, his once confident demeanor reduced to a shadow of its former self. As for Evelyn, she too was forced to confront the reality of her son's failures. With Trent no longer able to provide for her, she reluctantly agreed to move into an assisted living facility, where she would receive the care and attention she so desperately needed. I knew that my decision to leave Trent and divorce him would not be an easy one, but as I settled into our new home with my children, I felt a sense of peace and empowerment that I hadn't experienced in years. I was no longer the victim, but the victor, and I was ready to embrace the next chapter of my life. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my career, reconnecting with friends, and providing a stable, loving environment for my children. Trent, meanwhile, struggled to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, his attempts at reconciliation falling on deaf ears. As I watched him spiral downward, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. But it was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of relief and liberation that I felt. I was finally free, and I was determined to make the most of it. As the dust settled on my divorce from Trent, I found myself emerging from the ashes of our shattered marriage with a newfound sense of purpose and freedom. Gone were the days of constantly worrying about Evelyn's demands, Trent's infidelity, and the responsibilities that had once weighed me down. I threw myself into rebuilding my career, leveraging my marketing expertise to secure a series of lucrative freelance contracts. The extra income allowed me to provide a comfortable life for my children and to focus on my own well-being after years of putting everyone else first. Trent, on the other hand, continued to spiral downward. His dismissal from his high-profile job, coupled with the public humiliation of his affair and financial misdeeds, left him a shell of his former self. I watched with a mixture of pity and satisfaction as he struggled to find his footing, his once confident demeanor reduced to a desperate plea for forgiveness. "Rena, please," he begged during one of our court-ordered mediation sessions, his eyes bloodshot and his voice trembling. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to make things right. Can't we work something out?" I regarded him coolly, my arms crossed over my chest. "Work something out, Trent? You had your chance to make things right, and you chose to betray me and our family instead." I paused, shaking my head. "No, Trent, you're going to have to live with the consequences of your actions." Trent opened his mouth to protest, but the mediator quickly intervened, steering the conversation back to the matter at hand, the custody and financial arrangements. In the end, I was granted full custody of our children, with Trent relegated to supervised visitation. He was also required to provide a significant portion of his income as child support, a consequence he clearly resented, but was powerless to fight. As I left the courthouse, my children in tow, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and empowerment. The nightmare of my marriage to Trent was finally over, and I was free to rebuild my life on my own terms. Over the next few months, I focused on establishing a stable and nurturing environment for my children. We moved into a cozy apartment, and I made sure to set aside dedicated time for family activities and outings. The kids, who had once been caught in the crossfire of Trent's betrayal, slowly began to blossom, their laughter and joy a testament to the healing power of a loving, stable home. Trent, meanwhile, continued to struggle. He lost his job, his savings depleted by the divorce and child support payments. Evelyn, abandoned by both Trent and Clara, had no choice but to enter an assisted living facility, a decision that only added to Trent's woes. I heard through the grapevine that Trent had tried to reach out to Clara, hoping to rekindle their relationship, but she wanted nothing to do with him. Apparently, even the woman he had betrayed his family for had decided that he was more trouble than he was worth. As I watched Trent's downward spiral, I felt a sense of vindication, but also a twinge of pity. He had lost everything: his family, his career, his social standing. And while a part of me couldn't help but feel a measure of satisfaction in his comeuppance, another part of me recognized the pain and anguish he must be experiencing. But I quickly pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the bright future that lay ahead of me and my children. We had weathered the storm of Trent's betrayal, and we were stronger for it. And as I looked towards the horizon, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation for what the future had in store.